This is an introductory video to the endocrine system. And in the next series of videos, we're going to go over the functions of the endocrine system. We're going to look at the chemical classification of hormones, receptor types for those hormones, and the functions of various endocrine glands. The endocrine system is a really complex system. And where you really start to see the effects of the endocrine system is when you have something wrong with the endocrine system. For example, when we're looking at the thyroid gland, you can have hypersecretion and hyposecretion that's going to result in various thyroid gland disorders. Some of these can cause exophthalmos, or the protrusion of the eyes, goiter formation. You can have creatinism, where the infant doesn't have enough thyroid hormones, which results in metabolic disorders, as well as shortened stature and mental deficiencies. Growth hormone helps the body to grow, but if you have too much growth hormone, you can have gigantism. If you have too little growth hormone, this can result in a shorter stature or dwarfism. Adrenal gland disorders. Well, most people associate the adrenal glands with the production of adrenaline, also called epinephrine, and noradrenaline, also called norepinephrine. What we're going to see is that the adrenal gland also contains an adrenal cortex that makes a number of different hormones. One of these hormones is cortisol. And if you have increased amounts of cortisol, this can result in a condition called Cushing syndrome. And here's a young boy before the onset of Cushing syndrome, and then here he is 4 months later with Cushing syndrome. Or you look at the pineal gland or pineal gland and the production of melatonin and how this affects your circadian rhythm or your day-night cycle. So there's lots to talk about with the endocrine system. Right now we're going to focus on just a general overview of the endocrine system and looking at the functions of the endocrine system. Together, the nervous system and the endocrine system are going to coordinate the functions of all body systems. The nervous system is going to regulate body activities through neural impulses or action potentials. When we get to this, we're going to see it's a movement of two ions. We have sodium moving into the neuron and potassium moving out of the neuron to give you an action potential that's going to go down its axon and then stimulate another cell. The endocrine system regulates body activities through the release of chemical messengers, which are called hormones. And hormones are going to go through the bloodstream and then bind onto a receptor on another cell and activate that cell or stimulate that cell to do something. Endocrinology is the study of the structure and function of the endocrine system and the diagnosis and treatment of endocrine disorders. You definitely want to make sure you know the difference between an exocrine and an endocrine gland. The body contains two types of glands, exocrine and endocrine. Exocrine glands secrete their products through ducts and empty onto covering or lining epithelium. For example, when you look at the sweat gland produces sweat, which goes through a duct onto the skin surface. Here's an oil gland or sebaceous gland. This gland secretes its products through a duct, hence exocrine gland, and it's going to come into, most of the time it's going to go into where you have a hair coming through the skin, and then that secretion is going to come up and around and onto the skin. The pancreas also has an exocrine portion. People think of the pancreas as its production of insulin and glucagon, which certainly does, but the pancreas is also involved in the production of enzymes. And these enzymes are produced by these cells here, which produce digestive enzymes and bicarbonate. And these digestive enzymes are going to move through a duct, which you see here going through the pancreas, and they're going to empty into the small intestine. And that's going to help to digest the food, and the bicarbonate's going to help to neutralize that acidic chyme that's coming from the stomach. So it has an exocrine function. But the pancreas also has an endocrine function. So when we look at endocrine glands, these secrete their products or hormones into the blood. And they do not have ducts. They are ductless glands. Looking at the pancreas again, we see that this area right here, which is called an islet of Langerhans or pancreatic islet, contains hormone-producing cells. We have cells that are going to produce glucagon, and that's going to raise your blood sugar if it gets too low. We have other cells that will produce insulin, which are going to lower your blood sugar if it gets too high. Well, these hormones, when they get produced from these cells, move into the interstitial fluid and then directly into the bloodstream and then are transported to where they're going to have an effect on another cell. So you want to make sure you can explain the difference between an exocrine and an endocrine gland. When looking at endocrine glands versus endocrine tissue, Looking at the endocrine system, you'll see that we have discrete endocrine glands and we have endocrine tissue. So what's the difference between these? Well, discrete endocrine glands are organs whose primary function is the production and secretion of hormones. That's pretty much all they do. For example, your pituitary gland only produces or releases hormones. Thyroid gland only produces hormones. A parathyroid gland only produces hormones. Adrenal gland only produces hormones, as well as pineal gland or pineal gland. You do have organs, though, that contain endocrine tissue, and they secrete hormones, but that's not their primary function. For example, when you look at the kidneys, you don't think of the kidneys necessarily as an endocrine gland, but the kidneys have endocrine tissue. This endocrine tissue can produce hormones. So, for example, erythropoietin produced by the kidneys is going to help in blood production. The pancreas, it's not a discrete endocrine gland because it's other functions. It produces digestive enzymes, for example, but it also produces insulin and glucagon. The heart actually has endocrine tissue, and we're going to see the hormones that are produced by the heart can help control blood pressure. Now, you don't need to go through and memorize every single one of the endocrine tissues at this point, but just to give you an idea that you have discrete endocrine glands as well as organs that have endocrine tissue that produce hormones, but that's not their primary function. So we just refer to those as endocrine tissue. Let's test our knowledge. Go ahead and pause your video and select the term that makes the sentence correct. Here are the answers. Pause your video and select the term that makes the sentence correct. Here are the answers. This concludes the video, and if you have any questions, please let me know.